You've got your needle threaded and you're ready to start punching, but before we begin, I want to take a moment and just go into further detail on how a punch needle actually works, because if you've never done this before, it may be a little confusing about which side you're supposed to create loops on. So let's take a look at the finished project and I'm going to explain further how a punch needle works. So here's an example of the finished project that we're working on, and the first thing you might notice is that from the trace pattern, it is in reverse, and that's because you are working from the back side of your work when you're punching. So punch needle has two different sides. It has a loopy stitch side, which you can see here. There are little loops, and it also has a flat stitch side, sort of like regular embroidery stitches. So when we work, we are working on the flat stitch side, which is technically the back, and the loopy side is the front, but it's the back while we're working on it. So whatever design you traced is in reverse as you're working on it. So this is important to note because while you're punching, you are not trying to create loops on this back side that you can see. You want the loops to be on the underside, and when we're done, you'll be able to display that loopy side. Now, you might be asking, can I display the flat stitch side if I want to? Of course, and actually I have a few patterns that I've even chosen to display on the flat stitch side just because you get cleaner lines, you might like the look of that more. But traditionally, it's the loopy side that you'll display. And for this tutorial, I'm going with tradition and we're gonna display the loopy side. So now that you have your needle threaded, let's go over some basic punching techniques. First of all, you're gonna hold that needle just like a pencil with the open part or that beveled edge, like I explained earlier, facing the direction you want to punch. So open part always faces the direction you want to punch, be it forward, backward, diagonal, sideways, whichever way you're punching, open part facing the direction you want to punch. Hold it just like a pencil. We want to make sure that your yarn can flow freely through your needle, so you're not holding it under your hand, you're not holding it tight on this hand, it's not caught underneath your arm. You want to make sure that that yarn is flowing freely. To get started, we're going to start on the innermost sections first. I don't need a super long tail, maybe an inch or so. I'm going to start by pushing my needle all the way down. So you can see here, there is no space between my needle and my fabric. Then when I come up, I'm going to keep the tip of that needle, open part facing where I want to go, directly on the fabric, and I'm going to slide it to the next stitch. And when I say slide to the next stitch, I'm talking about going about 1/4 of an inch forward along your pattern line. So you can see on this side, I have flat stitches, and underneath, I am making little loops. We don't want the loops to be on this side. We want them to be on the underside, which is technically the front. Now I've changed directions. Now the hoop is nice because it's small enough. If you want to change directions, you can either rotate your needle or you can just rotate the whole hoop. But I've changed directions, so I have rotated my needle, and now I'm punching back this way. So I'm going for about 4 stitches per inch, and I don't want a ton of monk's cloth showing. I don't want the stitches to be so packed that they're bulging, but I do want to go ahead and fill that back in. So I'm going to come back around like this, and I'm filling that in. Now, I've reached a point where I don't need to punch anymore, and when I flip this over, those stitches look nice and filled in, so I'm ready to stop. What should I do? I'm going to show you a little trick that's going to be super helpful at the end of your work as well. Before, when you're on your last stitch, before you pull that needle out, take your snippers and just trim the tail on the loopy side of your work. Go. And then pull out your yarn. And now you don't have a yarn tail on the back of your work. You still have this yarn tail, which we can trim that away. But we want to avoid a bunch of tails on the back that could accidentally get snagged. So there's my first section done. Let's move on to the next section. So I'm going to rethread my needle, or reset my needle, and I'm going to push all the way down. Now I can kind of do the same thing that I did at the end. I can kind of do that here too. When I push down, I can flip this hoop over and just pull that tail to the front so that it's not in danger of getting snagged on the back. And then I'm going to just follow that pattern line. Another important thing to remember when you're punching is to stagger your stitches. And here's what I mean by that. There's the best way that I can describe it is by using my fingers. So imagine that my hands, my fingers, are my stitches. And if I line them up perfectly, all lined up, finger to finger, you can see I've got little spaces in between, little bald spots. This is what this will look like in your work. If you line them all up, you'll have little bald spots. But watch what happens when I just gently offset them a little bit. So now my fingers aren't perfectly lined up, but they're staggered. All those little bald spots go away, and now my fingers are interlocked, which is what will happen with your stitches. So instead of lining everything up nice and even, you want to lay your stitches in a brick laying pattern. And that's described very clearly in your instructions right here. So we want to stagger your stitches instead of lining them straight up. You can leave a little bit of space between your rows. They need to be neighbors, but they don't have to be BFFs. We don't want those stitches just stacked on top of each other because you don't want your work to look like it's bulging. All right, let's go to that last little section. So again, I'm going to push down. I'm going to pull my tail to the front, and then I'm going to keep on punching. Just like this, staggering my stitches. And if you're not sure how it looks, flip it over, take a peek. You like the look of that? Great. All right, so now it's time to move on to a new color, and I'm going to show you a little trick for how to change your yarn color without having to rethread your needle. So grab your next yarn color. Let's go to the next video, and we're going to show you how to thread your needle without using your threader, and also do a little bit of troubleshooting if your stitches aren't staying put.